My Brother's Ghost Story by Amelia B. Edwards. The events which I am about to relate happened to my only brother. I have heard him tell the story many and many a time, never varying in the minutest particular. It happened about 30 years ago, more or less, while he was wandering, sketchbook in hand, among the high Alps, picking up subjects for an illustrated work on Switzerland. Having entered the Oberland by the Brunig Pass and filled his portfolio with what he used to call bits from the neighborhood of Meringen, he went over the Great Scheideck to Grindelwald, where he arrived one dusky September evening, about 3/4 of an hour after sunset. There had been a fair that day, and the place was crowded. In the best inn there was not an inch of space to spare. There were only 2 inns at Grindelwald 30 years ago, so my brother went to the one other, at the end of the covered bridge next the church, and there, with some difficulty, obtained the promise of a pile of rugs and a mattress, in a room which was already occupied by 3 other travellers. The Adler was a primitive hostelry, half farm, half inn, with great rambling galleries outside, and a huge general room like a barn. At the upper end of this room stood long stoves, like metal counters, laden with steaming pans, and glowing underneath like furnaces. At the lower end, smoking, supping, and chatting, were congregated some 30 or 40 guests, chiefly mountaineers, char-drivers, and guides. Among these my brother took his seat, and was served, like the rest, with a bowl of soup, a platter of beef, a flagon of country wine, and a loaf made of corn. Presently a huge St. Bernard dog came and laid his nose upon my brother's arm. In the meantime he fell into conversation with 2 Italian youths, bronzed and dark-eyed, near whom he happened to be seated. They were Florentines. Their names, they told him, were Stefano and Battisto. They had been travelling for some months on commission, selling cameos, mosaics, sulphur casts, and the like pretty Italian trifles, and were now on their way to Interlaken and Geneva. Weary of the cold north, they longed, like children, for the moment which should take them back to their own blue hills and grey-green olives, to their workshop on the Ponte Vecchio, and their home down by the Arno. It was quite a relief to my brother, on going up to bed, to find that these youths were to be 2 of his fellow lodgers. The 3rd was already there, and sound asleep, with his face to the wall. They scarcely looked at this 3rd. They were all tired, and all anxious to rise at daybreak, having agreed to walk together over the Wengern Alp as far as Lauterbrunnen. So my brother and the 2 youths exchanged a brief good night, and, before many minutes, were all as far away in the land of dreams as their unknown companion. My brother slept profoundly, so profoundly that, being roused in the morning by a clamour of merry voices, he sat up dreamily in his rugs and wondered where he was. "Good day, signor," cried Battisto. "Here is a fellow-traveller going the same way as ourselves. Christian Bowman, native of Kandersteg, musical box-maker by trade, stands 5 feet 11 in his shoes, and is at Monsieur's service to command," said the sleeper of the night before. He was as fine a young fellow as one would wish to see. Light and strong and well-proportioned, with curling brown hair, and bright, honest eyes that seemed to dance at every word he uttered. "Good morning," said my brother. "You were asleep last night when we came up." "Asleep! I should think so, after being all day in the fair and walking from Meringen the evening before. What a capital fair it was!" "Capital indeed," said Baptisto. "We sold cameos and mosaics yesterday for nearly 50 francs. "Oh, you sell cameos and mosaics, you two. Show me your cameos, and I will show you my musical boxes. I have such pretty ones, with colored views of Geneva and Chillon on the lids, playing 2, 4, 6, and even 8 tunes. Ah, I will give you a concert." And with this he unstrapped his pack, displayed his little boxes on the table, and wound them up, one after the other, to the delight of the Italians. "I helped to make them myself, every one," said he, proudly. "Is it not pretty music? I sometimes set one of them when I go to bed at night, and fall asleep listening to it. I am sure then to have pleasant dreams. But let us see your cameos. Perhaps I may buy one for my Marie, if they are not too dear. Marie is my sweetheart, and we are to be married next week." "Next week!" exclaimed Stefano. "That is very soon. Baptisto has a sweetheart also, up at Impruneta, but they will have to wait a long time before they can buy the ring." Baptisto blushed like a girl. "Hush, brother," said he. "Show the cameos to Christian, and give your tongue a holiday." But Christian was not so to be put off. "What is her name?" said he. "Tush! Baptisto, you must tell me her name. Is she pretty? Is she dark or fair? Do you often see her when you are at home? Is she very fond of you? Is she as fond of you as Marie is of me?" "Nay, how should I know that?" asked the soberer Baptisto. "She loves me, and I love her. That is all. And her name? Margarita. A charming name, and she is herself as pretty as her name, I'll engage. Did you say she was fair?" "I said nothing about it one way or the other," said Baptisto, unlocking a green box clamped with iron, and taking out tray after tray of his pretty wares. "There, those pictures all inlaid in little bits are Roman mosaics. These flowers on a black ground are Florentine. The ground is of hard, dark stone, and the flowers are made of thin slices of jasper, onyx, cornelian, and so forth. Those forget-me-nots, for instance, are bits of turquoise, and that poppy is cut from a piece of coral." "I like the Roman ones best," said Christian. "What place is that with all the arches?" "This is the Colosseum, and the one next to it is St. Peter's. But we Florentines care little for the Roman work. It is not half so fine or so valuable as ours. The Romans make their mosaics of composition." "Composition or not, I like the little landscapes best," said Christian. "There is a lovely one, with a pointed building and a tree and mountains at the back. How I should like that one for Marie." "You may have it for 8 francs, replied Baptisto. "We sold 2 of them yesterday for 10 each. It represents the tomb of Caius Cestus, near Rome." "A tomb?" echoed Christian, considerably dismayed. "Diable! That would be a dismal present to one's bride." "She would never guess that it was a tomb, if you did not tell her," suggested Stefano. Christian shook his head. "That would be next door to deceiving her," said he. "Nay," interposed my brother, "the owner of that tomb has been dead these 18 or 1900 years. One almost forgets that he was ever buried in it. 18 or 1900 years? Then he was a heathen?" "Undoubtedly, if by that you mean that he lived before Christ." Christian's face lighted up immediately. "Oh, that settles the question," said he, pulling out his little canvas purse and paying his money down at once. "A heathen's tomb is as good as no tomb at all. I'll have it made into a brooch for her at Interlaken. Tell me, Baptisto, what shall you take home to Italy for your Margarita?" Baptisto laughed and chinked his 8 francs. "That depends on trade," said he. If we make good profits between this and Christmas, I may take her a Swiss muslin from Bern. But we have already been away 7 months, and we have hardly made 100 francs over and above our expenses." And with this the talk turned upon general matters. The Florentines locked away their treasures, Christian restrapped his pack, and my brother and all went down together and breakfasted in the open air outside the inn. It was a magnificent morning, cloudless and sunny, with a cool breeze that rustled in the vine upon the porch, and flecked the table with shifting shadows of green leaves. All around and about them stood the great mountains, with their blue-white glaciers bristling down to the verge of the pastures, and the pine woods creeping darkly up their sides. To the left, the Wetterhorn, to the right, the Eiger. Straight before them, dazzling and imperishable, like peaks of frosted silver, the Weischerhorner clustered on the verge of an icy precipice. Breakfast over, they bade farewell to their hostess, and mountain staff in hand, took the path to the Vengern Alp. Half in light, half in shadow, lay the quiet valley, dotted over with farms, and traversed by a torrent that rushed, milk-white, from its prison in the glacier. The 3 lads walked briskly in advance, their voices chiming together every now and then in chorus of laughter. Somehow my brother felt sad. He lingered behind, and plucking a little red flower from the bank, watched it hurry away with the torrent, like a life on the stream of time. Why was his heart so heavy, and why were their hearts so light? As the day went on, my brother's melancholy, and the mirth of the young men, seemed to increase. Full of youth and hope, they talked of the joyous future, and built up pleasant castles in the air. Battisto, grown more communicative, admitted that to marry Margherita, and become a master mosaicist, would fulfill the dearest wish of his life. Stefano, not being in love, preferred to travel. Christian, who seemed to be the most prosperous, declared that it was his darling ambition to rent a farm in his native Candor Valley, and lead the patriarchal life of his fathers. As for the musical box trade, he said, one must live in Geneva to make it answer, but for his part he loved the pine forests and the snow peaks better than all the towns in Europe. Marie, too, had been born among the mountains, and it would break her heart if she thought she were to live in Geneva all her life, and never see the Candor Tal again. Chatting thus, the morning wore on to noon, and the party rested a while in the shade of a clump of gigantic firs, festooned with trailing banners of grey-green moss. Here they ate their luncheon, to the silvery music of one of Christian's little boxes, and by heard the sullen echo of an avalanche far away on the shoulder of the Jungfrau. Then they went on again in the burning afternoon, to heights where the Alp rose fails from the sterile steep, and the brown lichen grows more and more scantily among the stone. Here only the bleached and barren skeletons of a forest of dead pines varied the desolate monotony. Here only the bleached and barren skeletons of a forest of dead pines varied the desolate monotony, and high on the summit of the pass stood a little solitary inn between them and the sky. At this inn they rested again, and drank to the health of Christian and his bride, in a jug of country wine. He was in uncontrollable spirits, and shook hands with all them over and over again. "By nightfall tomorrow," said he, "I shall hold her once more in my arms. It is now nearly 2 years since I came home to see her, at the end of my apprenticeship. Now I am foreman, with a salary of 30 francs a week, and well able to marry." 30 francs a week!" echoed Battisto. Corpo di Bacco, that is a little fortune. Christian's face beamed. Yes, said he, we shall be very happy, and by, who knows, we may end our days in the Candor Tall, and bring up our children to succeed us. Ah, if Marie knew that I should be there tomorrow night, how delighted she would be. How so? Said my brother. Does she not expect you? Not a bit of it. She has no idea that I can be there till the day after tomorrow, nor could I, if I took the road all round by Unterseen and Frutigen. I mean to sleep tonight at Lotterbrunnen, and tomorrow morning shall strike across the Schlingel glacier to Kandersteg. If I rise a little before daybreak, I shall be at home by sunset. At this moment the path took a sudden turn and began to descend in sight of an immense perspective of very distant valleys. Christian flung his cap into the air and uttered a great shout. "Look!" said he, stretching out his arms as if to embrace the dear familiar scene. "Oh, look! There are the hills and woods of Interlaken, and here, below the precipices on which we stand, lies Lauterbrunnen. God be praised who has made our native land so beautiful." The Italians smiled at each other, thinking their own Arno Valley far more fair. But my brother's heart warmed to the boy, and echoed his thanksgiving in that spirit which accepts all beauty as a birthright and an inheritance. And now their course lay across an immense plateau, all rich with cornfields and meadows, and studded with substantial homesteads built of old brown wood, with huge sheltering eaves and strings of corn hanging like golden ingots along the carven balconies. Blue whortleberries grew beside the footway, and now and then they came upon a wild gentian, or a star-shaped immortelle. Then the path became a mere zigzag on the face of the precipice, and in less than half an hour they reached the lowest level of the valley. The glowing afternoon had not yet faded from the uppermost pines, when they were all dining together in the parlour of a little inn looking to the Jungfrau. In the evening my brother wrote letters, while the three lads strolled about the village. At 9 o'clock they bade each other good night, and went to their several rooms. Weary as he was, my brother found it impossible to sleep. The same unaccountable melancholy still possessed him, and when at last he dropped into an uneasy slumber, it was but to start over and over and over again from frightful dreams, faint with a nameless terror. Towards morning he fell into a profound sleep, and never woke until the day was fast advancing towards noon. He then found, to his regret, that Christian had long since gone. He had risen before daybreak, breakfasted by candlelight, and started off in the grey dawn, as merry, said the host, as a fiddler at a fair. Stefano and Battisto were still waiting to see my brother, being charged by Christian with a friendly farewell message to him, and an invitation to the wedding. They, too, were asked and meant to go, so my brother agreed to meet them at Interlaken on the following Tuesday, whence they might walk to Kandersteg by easy stages, reaching their destination on the Thursday morning, in time to go to church with the bridal party. My brother then bought some of the little Florentine cameos, wished the two boys every good fortune, and watched them down the road till he could see them no longer. Left now to himself, he wandered out with his sketchbook and spent the day in the upper valley. At sunset he dined alone in his chamber by the light of a single lamp. This meal dispatched, he drew nearer to the fire, took out a pocket edition of Goethe's Essays on Art, and promised himself some hours of pleasant reading. Ah, how well I know that very book, in its faded cover, and how often I have heard him describe that lonely evening. The night had by this time set in cold and wet. The damp logs spluttered on the hearth, and a wailing wind swept down the valley, bearing the rain in sudden gusts against the panes. My brother soon found that to read was impossible. His attention wandered incessantly. He read the same sentence over and over again, unconscious of its meaning, and fell into long trains of thought leading far into the dim past. Thus the hours went by, and at 11 o'clock he heard the doors closing below, and the household retiring to rest. He determined to yield no longer to this dreaming apathy. He threw on fresh logs, trimmed the lamp, and took several turns about the room. Then he opened the casement and suffered the rain to beat against his face, and the wind to ruffle his hair, as it ruffled the acacia leaves in the garden below. Some minutes passed thus, and when at length he closed the window and came back into the room, his face and hair and all the front of his shirt were thoroughly saturated. To unstrap his knapsack and take out a dry shirt was, of course, his first impulse. To drop the garment, listen eagerly, and start to his feet, breathless and bewildered, was the next. For, borne fitfully upon the outer breeze, now sweeping past the window, now dying in the distance, he heard a well-remembered strain of melody, subtle and silvery as the sweet airs of Prospero's Isle, and proceeding unmistakably from the musical box which had, the day before, accompanied the luncheon under the fir-trees of the Vengern Alp. Had Christian come back? And was it thus that he announced his return? If so, where was he? Under the window? Outside in the corridor? Sheltering in the porch and waiting for admittance, my brother threw open the casement again and called him by his name. "Christian, is that you?" All without was intensely silent. He could hear the last gust of wind and rain moaning farther and farther away upon its wild course down the valley, and the pine trees shivering like living things. "Christian!" he said again, and his own voice seemed to echo strangely on his ear. "Speak! Is it you?" Still no one answered. He leaned out into the dark night, but could see nothing, not even the outline of the porch below. He began to think that his imagination had deceived him, when suddenly the strain burst forth again, this time apparently in his own chamber. As he turned, expecting to find Christian at his elbow, the sounds broke off abruptly, and a sensation of intensest cold seized him in every limb, not the mere chill of nervous terror, not the mere physical result of exposure to wind and rain, but a deadly freezing of every vein, a paralysis of every nerve, an appalling consciousness that in a few moments more the lungs must cease to play and the heart to beat. Powerless to speak or stir, he closed his eyes and believed that he was dying. This strange faintness lasted but a few seconds. Gradually the vital warmth returned, and with it strength to close the window and stagger to a chair. As he did so, he found the breast of his shirt all stiff and frozen, and the rain clinging in solid icicles upon his hair. He looked at his watch. It had stopped at 20 minutes before 12. He took his thermometer from the chimney-piece and found the mercury at 70. Heavenly powers! How were these things possible in a temperature of 70 degrees and with a large fire blazing on the hearth? He poured out half a tumbler of cognac and drank it at a draught. Going to bed was out of the question. He felt that he dared not sleep, that he scarcely dared to think. All he could do was to change his linen, pile on more logs, wrap himself in his blankets, and sit all night in an easy-chair before the fire. My brother had not long sat thus, however, before the warmth, and probably the nervous reaction, drew him off to sleep. In the morning he found himself lying on the bed, without being able to remember in the least how or when he reached it. It was again a glorious day. The rain and wind were gone, and the Sibyl horn at the end of the valley lifted its head into an unclouded sky. Looking out upon the sunshine, he almost doubted the events of the night, and, but for the evidence of his watch, which still pointed to 20 minutes before 12, would have been disposed to treat the whole matter as a dream. As it was, he attributed more than half his terrors to the prompting of an overactive and overwearied brain. For all this, he still felt depressed and uneasy, and so very unwilling to pass another night at Lauterbrunnen that he made up his mind to proceed that morning to Interlaken. While he was yet loitering over his breakfast and considering whether he should walk the 7 miles of road or hire a vehicle, a char came rapidly to the inn door, and a young man jumped out. "Why, Battisto!" exclaimed my brother in astonishment as he came into the room. "What brings you here today? Where is Stefano?" "I have left him at Interlaken, signor," replied the Italian. Something there was in his voice, something in his face, both strange and startling. "What is the matter?" asked my brother breathlessly. "He is not ill. No accident has happened?" Battisto shook his head, glanced furtively up and down the passage, and closed the door. "Stefano is well, signor, but a circumstance has occurred, a circumstance so strange. Signor, do you believe in spirits?" "In spirits, Battisto?" "Aye, signor, for if ever the spirit of any man, dead or living, appealed to human ears, the spirit of Christian came to me last night at 20 minutes before 12 o'clock. "At 20 minutes before 12 o'clock?" repeated my brother. "I was in bed, signor, and Stefano was sleeping in the same room. I had gone up quite warm, and had fallen asleep full of pleasant thoughts. By and by, although I had plenty of bedclothes and a rug over me as well, I woke, frozen with cold and scarcely able to breathe. I tried to call to Stefano, but I had no power to utter the slightest sound, and I thought my last moment was come. All at once I heard a sound under the window, a sound which I knew to be Christian's musical box, and it played as it played when we lunched under the fir trees, except that it was more wild and strange and melancholy, solemn to hear, awful to hear. Then, signor, it grew fainter and fainter, and then it seemed to float past upon the wind and die away. When it had ceased, my frozen blood grew warm again, and I cried out to Stefano. When I told him what had happened, he declared I had been only dreaming. I made him strike a light, that I might look at my watch. It pointed to 20 minutes before 12, and had stopped there. And stranger still, Stefano's watch had done the very same. Now tell me, signor, do you believe that there is any meaning in this, or do you think, as Stefano persists in thinking, that it was all a dream?" "What is your own conclusion, Battisto?" "My conclusion, signor, is that some harm has happened to poor Christian on the glacier, and that his spirit came to me last night. Battisto, he shall have help if living, or rescue for his poor corpse if dead, for I too believe that all is not well." And with this, my brother told him briefly what had occurred to himself in the night, dispatched messengers for the 3 best guides in Lauterbrunnen, and prepared ropes, ice hatchets, alpenstocks, and all such matters necessary for a glacier expedition. Hasten as he would, however, it was nearly midday before the party started. Arriving in about half an hour at a place called Stechelberg, they left the char, in which they had travelled so far, at a chalet, and ascended a steep path in full view of the Breithorn glacier, which rose up to the left like a battlemented wall of solid ice. The way now lay for some time among pastures and pine forests. Then they came to a little colony of chalets, called Steinberg, where they filled their water bottles, got their ropes in readiness, and prepared for the Schlingel Glacier. A few minutes more, and they were on the ice. At this point the guides called a halt and consulted together. One was for striking across the lower glacier towards the left and reaching the upper glacier by the rocks which bound it on the south. The other two preferred the north or right side, and this my brother finally took. The sun was now pouring down with almost tropical intensity, and the surface of the ice, which was broken into long, treacherous fissures, smooth as glass and blue as the summer sky, was both difficult and dangerous. Silently and cautiously they went, tied together at intervals of about 3 yards each, with 2 guides in front and the third bringing up the rear. Turning presently to the right, they found themselves at the foot of a steep rock, some 40 feet in height, up which they must climb to reach the upper glacier. The only way in which Battisto or my brother could hope to do this was by the help of a rope steadied from below and above. 2 of the guides accordingly clambered up the face of the crag by notches in the surface, and 1 remained below. The rope was then let down, and my brother prepared to go first. As he planted his foot in the first notch, a smothered cry from Battisto arrested him. "Santa Maria! Signor, look yonder!" My brother looked, and there, he ever afterwards declared, as surely as there is a heaven above us all, he saw Christian Baumann standing in the full sunlight, not 100 yards distant. Almost in the same moment that my brother recognized him, he was gone. He neither faded, nor sank down, nor moved away, but was simply gone, as if he had never been. Pale as death, Battisto fell upon his knees and covered his face with his hands. My brother, awe-stricken and speechless, leaned against the rock, and felt that the object of his journey was but too fatally accomplished. As for the guides, they could not conceive what had happened. "Did you see nothing?" asked my brother and Battisto, both together. But the men had seen nothing, and the one who had remained below said, "What should I see but the ice and the sunlight?" To this my brother made no other reply than by announcing his intention to have a certain crevasse, from which he had not once removed his eyes since he saw the figures standing on the brink, thoroughly explored before he went a step farther. Whereupon the 2 men came down from the top of the crag, resumed the ropes, and followed him incredulously. At the narrow end of the fissure he paused and drove his alpenstock firmly into the ice. It was an unusually long crevasse, at first a mere crack, but widening gradually as it went, and reaching down to unknown depths of dark, deep blue, fringed with long pendant icicles, like diamond stalactites. Before they had followed the course of this crevasse for more than 10 minutes, the youngest of the guides uttered a hasty exclamation. "I see something!" cried he. "Something dark, wedged in the teeth of the crevasse, a great way down." They all saw it, a mere indistinguishable mass, almost closed over by the ice walls at their feet. My brother offered 100 francs to the man who would go down and bring it up. They all hesitated. "We don't know what it is," said one. "Perhaps it is only a dead chamois," suggested another. Their apathy enraged him. "It is no chamois," he said angrily. "It is the body of Christian Baumann, native of Kandersteg, and by heaven, if you are all too cowardly to make the attempt, I will go down myself." The youngest guide threw off his hat and coat, tied a rope about his waist, and took a hatchet in his hand. "I will go, monsieur," said he, and without another word suffered himself to be lowered in. My brother turned away. A sickening anxiety came upon him, and presently he heard the dull echo of the hatchet far down in the ice. Then there was a call for another rope, and then the men all drew aside in silence, and my brother saw the youngest guide standing once more beside the chasm, flushed and trembling, with the body of Christian lying at his feet. Poor Christian! They made a rough bier with their ropes and alpenstocks, and carried him with great difficulty back to Steinberg. There they got additional help as far as Stechelberg, where they laid him in the char, and so brought him on to Lauterbrunnen. The next day my brother made it his sad business to precede the body to Kandersteg, and prepare his friends for its arrival. To this day, though all these things happened 30 years ago, he cannot bear to recall Marie's despair, or all the mourning that he innocently brought upon that peaceful valley. Poor Marie has been dead this many a year, and when my brother last passed through the Kandertal on his way to the Gemmi, he saw her grave beside the grave of Christian Baumann in the village burial ground. This is my brother's ghost story. Finis. The end of My Brother's Ghost Story by Amelia B. Edwards.